I love speaking at small forums like this because I was telling somebody earlier that I learn as much from my audiences as I share with you what I know. I feel like what I've been doing over the past 25 years is blazing a trail on really how to use photography to create change. And we all talk about it. I just heard this whole thing on National Geographic about how images generate change, but it's not the images themselves. And that's why I decided to entitle this talk Overexposed. I think it takes a little more than just the images to really create change, and I wanted to share with you how I've been able to do it. So I was born in Mexico, really lucky life. I'm one of those people that pinches herself because I just don't know how I got here, but especially to be an age. This is like the Mecca. But I grew up in this tiny town, and my parents were not big into nature, and my father didn't want me to be a marine biologist, so it was just one lucky accident after another, and then my mom was a huge champion for me. So that was really excellent that they allowed me to go and pursue a career in marine biology. And it was there that I became horrified at how our food is caught. I don't know if you remember in the 1980s, there was something about the dolphins being caught in the tuna nets, and we were those students going out to count how many dolphins were dying in the tuna nets when we first enacted those laws to protect dolphins. And it was very traumatizing for me to go and see these beautiful animals dead and in such a wasteful way. Same was true for sardines and for shrimp, the way we catch them, at least in Mexico. When I graduated in 1989, we still had an industrial instructional manual for how to can sea turtle meat. I mean, 1989 is not so long ago. So that showed me two things. The first is that a lot of change was needed. And just a few years later, when you have marine turtles protected in almost every country, you realize that change is possible. So how do you get there? Matt has asked me that if we have questions that I separated into blocks so that it works better for YouTube, because we're all into social media now. So we'll do that. First, I want to thank Sony. For me, it was one of those lucky things. Again, I met Kayla Lindquist, and one day she phoned me and she said, "Would you be willing to try some Sony cameras?" And I said, "Sure, I'm going to Morocco." And she sent me a whole box of cameras, and I literally unpacked them on the airplane, went to Morocco, and I was a convert. And that's how I became a Sony artisan. So thank you, Sony. They've been an amazing company for me. I sometimes think I can, become a little bit radical in my environmental views because I care so much. I really am passionate about this, and they've been very supportive of every crazy idea that I put forth, and I appreciate that. I want to also acknowledge that my daughter is here. She's 17 and she doesn't always want to hang out with me, but today she's here. And this is us 17 years ago in Montreal. We're at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature World Summit. So that was her first experience in conservation. So thank you for being here, sweetie. Appreciate it. And this is me at work. And I really work this simply. I don't subscribe to a lot of gear, even though I'm very excited about going to see all the new cool stuff out there. I travel very simple because the places that I go to, you don't get a camera shop to do a repair or to buy a spare. So everything has to be really simple. And Sony for me has been able to do that. I'm not a gearhead. If you have gear questions, we'll call in an expert because I don't care how it does it. I just care that my camera, it really is an extension of my mind and my creativity, and it allows me to do what I do quite seamlessly. And for that, I'm grateful too. This is my camera bag, and the gear changes. I'm incredibly lucky that Sony keeps sending me these amazing cameras to try, and I take them to very remote areas, and sometimes they come back more harmed than others. But so far they haven't failed me, and that's terrific. So other things that I bring, and we're not going to go into a lot of technical stuff, but I bring 2 of everything, sometimes 3, because things do fail or they break or they get wet. I always bring a tripod, just because a camera has motion, what do we call it? Has a specific name. The stabilization. Doesn't mean you don't need a tripod. There's amazing things that like time lapses that require tripods. Cleaning supplies, where I work, things do get really dirty. And then, all the downloading gear. I forgot my downloader once, and that was quite a challenge. And just tools to repair stuff. I wouldn't say that I'm a great photographer. I would say that my photography has had great influence over the work of many others. I was recognized in 2010 by Outdoor Photographer magazine as one of the most influential photographers of our generation, which was a bit of a surprise, but I'll take it. I've been really blessed to have been asked by this Mexican construction company for the past 20 years to publish a book that I put out every year on conservation issues. Their CEO is a nature lover, even though they're a big industrial corporation that makes cement. And he gives out a book to every employee and every stakeholder of his company, and these books are beautiful. And through these books is that I realized that there were photographers out there that were doing amazing conservation work. That a lot of photographers are just going behind one another, photographing the same eagle, the same polar bear, the same elephant. But that there were others out there that were photographing things that were really rare or really endangered. And more than that, they were telling stories about these things. And what I really wanted to share to you today is what does it take to make those images do the work? And for me, these books were my classroom. Publishing one a year has been incredible education. This is my latest one. Last year we published with National Geographic. For the first time, they allowed me to write. And I wanted to write, I wanted to write something that was not technical. It's very emotional. It's just how I feel in nature, and I wanted to share that with others. And so I hope you'll read it, because I'm proud of it, but I haven't received any feedback. So we'll see. And this year I'm publishing the 50th anniversary book for the Red List, the IUCN Red List of Endangered Species, and all their accomplishments in the last 50 years. I was also just asked to be the director of the largest nature and conservation photography competition in the world. It's called Por el Planeta, for the planet, and it's sponsored by Televisa, which is the largest broadcasting company in Latin America, Brazil, Spain, and Miami. And they're putting in $2 million for this competition, $300,000 in prizes. Pay attention, fellow photographers, $100,000 for the first prize. That's a chunk of cash. Could buy you a few Sony cameras. And so we're launching it in May, and it just makes me so proud to be able to put forth ways for photographers to make money and to put their work out there. And I love it that Televisa is a television company, so all of this is going to be on TV, and hopefully will have huge impact all over Latin America, Spain, and Brazil, which are all dear to my heart. So keep an eye out for Por el Planeta. So what we're going to talk about today is the role that the photographer plays as a storyteller, as a character in your own stories, and as an activist. And this is something new, and I get a lot of questions when I speak, because for those of us who have training as journalists, you're not supposed to have a biased line. You're supposed to be walking the neutral line and just tell the story as it is. But the more I'm out there watching things struggle and nature deteriorate and animals go extinct, the more I feel like I have to be an activist, and I can no longer sit on the neutral byline and wait for Rome to burn. So yes, I am an activist. There it is. I'm proud of it too. But it doesn't have to be, radical. It's just raising your voice for the things that you're passionate about. For myself, it's been everything from the inequalities and the racism and the struggles of the people on the border between Mexico and US, and that includes the environmental disaster that this huge fence that we've built between the two countries is, to poverty in places like Madagascar, women's rights and disease, and all of these things for me have been really tied close together. And the first question I encourage you to ask of yourselves is, what kind of photographer am I? I work with amazing photographers that love working in the studio, others that, for them the bottom line is how much money are they going to make, or people that really care about social, political, or environmental issues like myself. And I'll tell you, you're not going to get rich, but if you give your work this kind of purpose, you're going to want to get up every day to do it again. So for me, the opportunity to have spent so much time in places like Madagascar or Brazil, where people still live by their own means and they struggle every day, and there's such poetry in everything they do. It's been a gift. So whether it is the highlands of New Guinea, where people still dress up in traditional costume to compete to see who's the most traditional, that blew my mind. And there's probably, 20,000 performers and about 200 people, most of them photographers, that attend these big festivals in the middle of nowhere. So it's like shooting fish in a barrel. there's no real talent there. They really line up to be photographed. So if you want to jumpstart your career, I recommend it. But it's women like this, and it's by spending time with these people that I've come to realize that the values that we have in the West are so misguided. I was recently asked to do this talk for TEDx, and I was really proud of it. And you know, it's a very involved process to put together a TEDx talk. It took about a year, and they actually assigned me a coach to guide me through the process. So my first instinct was, yeah, I'm going to talk about the International League of Conservation Photographers because I'm really proud of that. And she said to me, no, you have to come up with a big idea. So what's your big idea? And it was a struggle to think about this for about 6 months. There were other speakers that we were called every week together as a group to talk about our big ideas. And every week I felt dumber and dumber. Like, I don't have any big ideas. And then it came to me, this idea of enoughness. Because as I've traveled around the world, I've come to realize that most people around the world have very different aspirations than the ones we do here. Here we're told every day, you deserve to be happy. You deserve that new car. You'll only be happy when you get that new job or that new pair of boots. And we aspire to this happiness. And the minute you get whatever it was that was going to make you happy, you're on to the next desire. So it's this roller coaster of being unsatisfied. Whereas with people like this, you realize that a warm fire and a basket full of fish and, you know, some friends and clean water, most people really care about in a day's work. And there's no real, you know, euphoric happiness, but there's contentment. And so through putting together this talk about enoughness is when I started to think about, you know, this internal yardstick, what makes me happy, how much is enough for me. And I really find myself questioning my purchases these days and my consumer choices and thinking about, you know, where my money is going. And maybe more stuff just means that I have to insure more stuff and store more stuff and my yard sale is going to be bigger. You know? So whether it's the highlands of Mexico, I did this for Starbucks a number of years ago, or the highlands of Ecuador, where children have so little and yet, you know, never see children throwing tantrums or whining or misbehaving. Highlands of Peru, where this little girl watches her family's sheep every day after school, you know, without complaint. You really realize that people need very little to be happy. So for me, enoughness was like a revelation, and I've gotten such great feedback for my talk. And I have to say that to put together a big idea and then put it forth in 10 minutes is a real challenge. And we were asked to do this presentation in it was a church somewhere in Colorado, I forget the town. And they had no way to darken the windows, so it was like bright daylight. And the clicker was not working. No. And they said that we were going to have a confidence screen, but there was none. You know, there was just a Mac that was pointing back at me, so I could see the screen behind me. So I didn't. It was such a challenge, and I was so nervous. So if you watch it, just tell me that it was great, and we're going to get along great. Oh, so by this time you think that I'm amazing and I have this cool life, but things don't always go as you plan. And so, and so that's me with all my Sony gear. So hey Sony, they kept me. So embarrassing.
Did the camera make it?
No. But the lenses did. You know? The lenses did, because it was a long shoot. I was there for a month, and this is probably day 12. And so I had 2 of everything. I had a second camera that worked, and I went back to my hotel and dried my lenses, and on we went. So people ask me, how do I do what you have done? And that's what people most want to know. Especially if you're jump-starting your career in photography, you want to know how I started. And for me, it really was, you know, one mistake after another. And that's how we all go about our careers, right? I started volunteering, and I became you know, that pesky photographer that donates pictures to conservation groups. I was really lucky to have an opportunity to travel to a few places and make a few pictures, and I realized that a lot of these groups, for me it was nature, but it could be anything. It could be poverty, women's rights, war, you name it. These groups need quality imagery to capture the world's attention. We are inundated with mediocre imagery. So you need a really good photograph to make people pause and think and maybe take a second look and maybe reach out for their pocketbook and their checkbook. So I volunteered, and after probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of volunteering and having a full-time job in something else that had to support everything else, I started becoming a part of the budget. I got my own budget line, and people now could pay for my work, and then eventually they started sending me places. And that's how I got started, and it was not overnight. If you're in to make money, I recommend commercial photography. Apparently they do a lot more business than us conservation photographers, but I've loved every day of what I've done. The other way of getting started is assisting other photographers. And I'll talk a little bit about my assisting role because I enjoy it quite a bit. And then the third is to just assign yourself a project, and we'll talk more about how to do that. So this year is the 25th anniversary of the work that I've been doing with Conservation International. And Conservation International is an amazing organization. Every year they use my images for their calendars, for their annual reports, for their invitations to their dinners and fundraisers. And it makes me really proud. I'm at a point in my career now where I don't have to charge them anymore. It just makes me proud that they still want to use my work and that my work has given them a voice. That image was made in Madagascar. That's a place where Conservation International has a huge project. CI works in places where you have the highest biodiversity, the highest concentration of endangered species in the last few pockets of habitat, places like Madagascar where 90% of the forest has already been cut. So the 10% that's left is crawling with this amazing wildlife. And there's a lot of photographers that are going out to places like Madagascar or the Philippines to photograph the wildlife. They specifically asked me to go and photograph the people, because without the local people, you cannot do conservation. You need to have them on your side. They need to be stakeholders in your projects. They need to be invested in the conservation journey, because it's not one that's going to make them rich, but it's one where they're going to find a few alternatives. So I've spent a lot of time working and traveling in communities like this one, and this was really funny. They hired a helicopter for me to do an overflight of what they call the central plateau of Madagascar. It's been heavily deforested, and so we were taking pictures of deforestation, basically. We had a French pilot, and he got lost. So he's trying to phone the capital city of Antananarivo to find out where we're supposed to be going, and he can't get cell phone reception, so he just landed the airplane in the middle of a field somewhere. By this point, we've been in the air, I don't know, for an hour and a half, and I really had to go to the bathroom. So I just ran to some bushes, and as I'm doing my thing, I hear all these voices, and it's all the villagers coming up to check out what this helicopter is doing there. It was so funny. And they'd probably never seen a helicopter or many white people around, and they just kept asking, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here?" It was very cute, and of course they didn't have much to give us, so just little twigs, a token, a gift is also special. And I photographed in places where there's a lot of poverty, and for me, photography is a very joyful thing. I try to look for fun patterns and colors. I really don't like to photograph people at their worst. I am such a hopeful person. I think that we can still turn it. And for me, images that give us a little hope and a positive outlook are better. Because I'm a marine biologist, and I know that 1 billion people on this planet depend on the ocean every day for their protein. Fisheries is a huge thing that I'm interested in. So I photographed a lot of people fishing. I photographed a lot of instances where you have local fishermen coming back with tiny little fish for dinner while there's a huge trawler in the distance bringing the fish that we eat to us in the West. I mean, the inequalities out there are enormous, and we need storytelling to explain it. This is a project that I did for Conservation International, a new marine protected area. And there's other things. For example, this is the valley of the baobabs. Baobabs are very endangered. They're very beautiful, very charismatic. They don't really move much, so you can make great pictures. You just have to wait for the light. And unfortunately, they're very endangered because people that live there, they grow rice, and to do that, they need to flood entire fields. And the baobabs are desert plants. They're not swamp plants, so they're drowning, basically. So it's pretty sad, and you cannot blame the local people. They're just poor, but how do you find a solution? I want to talk briefly, and this is embarrassing, this is my boyfriend. And he also is a photographer, and that is very serendipitous because it's great to work with somebody who has the same passions as you do. Paul Nicklin is an assignment photographer for National Geographic, and therefore he has a huge microphone, and almost every story he does is about conservation, and we are engaged right now in a number of really fun stories. I'll tell you a little bit about it, but he and I work a lot together, and this is me being a model. I am in for anything. We actually won a prize with American Photo Competition with this picture, so I want you to notice the pose because I've been practicing, and I'm getting really good at it. This is in the cenotes of Mexico. And we recently did this, I photographed this with the was it the 99, I think? The A99. This is a graveyard in Mexico. Where we did this for the sacred cenotes of the Maya, these incredible burial sites. And this is an area I discovered with my children. I took them there about 5 years ago, and we went down that ladder. There's, little palapa out there, and an Indian, a Mayan guy takes you 10 pesos, and then you go in and you swim, basically to get out of the heat. What they don't tell you is that this is a ceremonial Mayan burial site. And under 30 feet of water, there's about 122 human skulls that have been there for 2,000 years. And so all day long, tourists are coming from Cancun, and they lower them into this cave, and they go, the water's cold, and they get out, and they never realize that they have just swum in an incredible Mayan site. So there I am again, modeling, and it's just unbelievable. I think it was one of my children that went snorkeling, and he said in the dark, I see something in the bottom, and I'm not sure if it's pottery or if it's a human skull. And sure enough, pretty amazing. So I do get to do amazing things. Oh, there they are. Mickey and Juliana, my kids, they occasionally come with us on assignment, and they help carry tanks and swat mosquitoes or whatever needs to be done. So for me, the message is to shoot what you love, because it's a tough job, and business is hard, and it's just getting harder. It's a difficult proposition to find a good assignment out there. But if you love what you do, and if you're not doing it for the money, you're going to get up and do the best you can. So this is me at 24, and this is me now. I've spent the last 25 years going back to the same villages, mostly in the Amazon, and these are places that I love. I started going here first just as a tourist. And then I met a scientist who had been working there. She was a herpetologist, but she had found this indigenous tribe. She's a Canadian woman. She found that these Indian people, these indigenous people, the Kayapo, were living here, and they had written in concessions so much of their land for loggers to come in and take their mahogany. And it was so destructive, but they had no idea of how to do a better business deal. So Barbara started helping them, and she first proposed to them that maybe instead of selling their mahogany, they could be bringing scientists in, and maybe they should build a little house and rent for the scientists to stay there, and maybe some of them could be cooks, and maybe some of them could be guides. And it became a much more sustainable endeavor. So she started asking me to come with her. And this is the Iriri River. It's a tributary of the Xingu, which is in the headwaters of the Amazon, and it's just one of the most spectacular places on the planet. In the beginning, I was just there to document just how incredible these people were, and how self-sustaining they were. Back then, they had problems like cattle ranchers or soybean plantations that were infringing on their land, and that seemed like such a big deal. So we were dealing with that. This here was a meeting that Barbara organized, where she brought all the chiefs. If you can imagine a piece of land the size of the state of New York, where only 5,000 people live. And they live scattered in 21 tiny little villages, and there's no roads. So the only way for them to come together was to fly them all to one village. And they were so emotional to get together and have a chance to meet and talk about their future, and to come up with a plan for how they were going to empower themselves and ask the Brazilian government to be fair. So this is a few years ago, and I've had the enormous fortune of going back year after year for many years, to the point that these people now know me. This is a girl, I photographed her a couple of years later, and when I go back now, they have children, and some of them have known me for a long, long time. And like I said, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. They're so beautiful, and no other photographer is allowed, so how could I go wrong? It's access has been the most amazing thing, because once people know you and once they're comfortable with you, you can really go to work without anybody paying any attention to you. The body painting is a huge part of their culture. It's a part of the fabric of their social web, and they spend a lot of time painting each other. It's a semi-permanent ink. It lasts about a week. So it comes out of a fruit. They mix it in with charcoal, and then they make this ink. And it takes hours to paint somebody. And the children sit so still, and they're so well behaved. And the painting tells you a lot about the people that are doing the painting, about the artist, but also about the social structure of the community. It tells you if a person is married or single, if they're a grown-up, if somebody's mourning or just had a baby. Painting tells you a lot. And I just find them beautiful. They're incredible, and they're so self-sustaining. They have made a determination. They've been out to the cities. They know what's out here and they don't want it. They're very proud of the way they live, and they're incredible at just surviving on their own. I've been going out hunting with the men, and they are just unbelievable. It's like an invisible clue in the middle of the village. You can be there 11 in the morning, everybody's napping, and all of a sudden somebody gets up and they all run into the forest, and you have to catch up. And you'll hear 3 shots in the distance and guess how many wild pigs they've killed. I mean, they're incredible shots. They never miss, and what they bring back, they share with the entire village. Everybody gets a piece of the meat. And they're just beautiful, wonderful, super clean. They take the babies, from the babies to the elderly. Everybody goes down to the river twice a day. And they spend hours beading. They love these Czechoslovakian beads. They're glass beads. They don't want none of that Michael stuff. They don't come in with the plastic stuff. But personal ornamentation is so important, and they're so proud. So 20 years ago, somebody had the brilliant idea of proposing these huge dams in the Amazon. And the government was never able to pass the legislation to approve it until President Dilma came into power just 3 years ago. So now we have the 3rd largest hydroelectric dam in the world going on in the headwaters of the river, where 40,000 of these people live. Not just the Kayapo, other Indians as well. And of course, the Amazon is flat, and what you need for electricity is running water. So they're going to have to flood a huge area of the forest to create a holding tank for the water to be able to flow. The river below the dam is going to dry out, and that's the only means of transportation for all these people. So what's going to happen to them is unclear, and it's very, very sad. And we've lost. The dam is going up, and this is already happening. And for me, it's been heartbreaking to the point that I just don't want to go back. But 3 or 4 years ago, the International Conservation Fund of Canada, another organization that I volunteer for, asked me to go down and make a series of pictures that would tie the fate of these people to the river. And so I played with a lot of concepts, to make it fun, to make it light, to make it about, the more practical sides of the river, the fishing, the bathing, to tie it to the babies and the children. But I really wanted it to have this emotional content, so that people know that these people are afraid. It's coming and they can't stop it, and they don't know what's going to happen. So how do you go about it? Do you become a photography business, or do you become a nonprofit? And that's a very real question, because where the money comes from really matters. If you're independently wealthy, well then great. If you can find somebody to pay you to go, then that's great. But you can also raise the money to do this yourself by crowdsourcing, or because some wealthy individuals. Everybody at the end of the year needs to do something with their excess money. So you can either give it to Uncle Sam, or you can make a donation. And a lot of people choose to donate their money to good causes. So if you decide to become a nonprofit, it's very possible. It's not that difficult to apply for 501c3 charitable status, but it's also a lot of work. The IRS holds us to very high standards. So what I've chosen to do is to be under the umbrella of another 501c3. So I'm just an initiative under somebody else, and they do all the IRS work. So if I can share anything of value with you, it's that. Find an organization where you can run your tax-deductible donations through. It can be almost any kind of organization, but it'll save you a lot of heartaches. So the International League of Conservation Photographers is probably the best idea I've ever had. It was in 2005, I was thinking about the work of nature photographers in my own community. And I was thinking about my neighbor, who's probably 65-year-old lady, and she would go in the morning and take pictures of her flowers, and those were nature photographs. And then I started thinking about Nick Nichols from National Geographic, and he walked 2,000 miles through the Congo following elephant trails in places where no human had ever been before to call attention to the need for conservation. And then he took those images to President Bongo in Gabon and convinced them that they needed a protected area system. So by the time he was done with his mega transect, 13 new national parks were already in the works. And I thought, it's not right for both of these people, the little lady with the flowers and Nick Nichols, to be called nature photographers. He clearly is something more. And so I Googled it, conservation photography, and it didn't exist. And so I thought, wow, aha, we're onto something. And I started looking for other photographers who had that same passion. I'm going to play, it's a probably 3-minute clip. It explains a little how conservation photography works. And I think, do I have to click again?
Photography can connect with people in an instant. Absolutely, with one single image, there's the connection. Across all languages, around the world, this immediate connection.
Photography and conservation have gone hand in hand for decades, but it's only now that we're actually giving it this title, that we're sort of giving it a gravitas. You really can't have successful conservation without photography shining a light on it.
Conservation photography is creating images that will affect change and ensuring that those images do affect change. The responsibility doesn't end when you trip the shutter. It actually begins then. Then you have to make sure those images get before the people that need to see them.
If the photographer is using the camera to express his feeling, the relationship he has with this being that he's capturing through his lens, then that picture, that image, is going to reach out to the people looking and reach into their hearts. That's what's going to make them want to help.
Long-term and meaningful conservation success, really is only possible if NGOs and photographers come together and work together. Very often also working with scientists. If you can get those three sectors working together, you're pretty much an unstoppable force.
It's long overdue that we started using photography not just for social change, but for environmental and conservation change. And that's what this revolution is about.
What we've been able to create here is a community of comrades in arms that goes beyond any single image. We are committed to doing something for our planet, one image at a time. So that was a real highlight of my career, to have to have this good idea, to do all the hard work to put it forth and to see it flourish. And even after I stepped down after 7 years of directing it so that I could get back my photography career, it's still doing great things. ILCP, if you have some money left in your pockets, they're a good organization, over 100 photographers that are doing incredibly passionate work to save the tigers, to stop climate change, to prevent deforestation, to keep water clean. They're amazing photographers out there, and there's so much that we can learn from them. I don't want to embarrass you, Asher J, but my friend Asher J, if you think I'm a rabid environmentalist, she leaves me pale in comparison. Asher is an amazing artist, and she too has been working with conservation groups. She does graphic design. You should check her work out, Asher J. Amazing stuff. Thanks for coming, honey. So, if you are going to start creating this type of career for yourself, the first thing you need to do is come up with a business plan. And running a conservation photography project, initiative, is no different than running a business. So I recommend, you can find it in Google almost anywhere, what are the steps to build your own project. And it really has to be done this way. It has to be so serious. Especially if you're going to ask for other people to pay for your work, you need to have everything from a very clear mission to long-term objectives, short-term goals, you need to make sure that nobody else is already doing exactly what you're doing and you're competing with others. And then you need to have very specific deliverables, and you need to be able to measure how you're succeeding in your goals and objectives. More importantly, you need to have a very realistic budget and a timeline for when these things are going to happen. And as I learned with the ILCP, there's absolutely no shame in not achieving some of your goals or objectives in the first year. You just roll them onto the next year and you just keep going. And every time you achieve a little one, you feel so good, I raised my first $1,000, check. It really feels good, and it becomes that blueprint that takes you forward. Yes?
Okay, I know people who are passionate about preserving people, other ones who are passionate about preserving animals, plants. What's your highest passion?
For me, the criteria that I use is something that I call irreplaceability. When something is not going to be here anymore and there's nothing we can do to bring it back, then we've lost something forever. For me, extinction is that. I do care about dogs and cats and horses, but there's gazillions of those, and I absolutely abhor, cruelty towards animals. But for me, I need to focus on things that when they go, we'll never see them again, and the legacy of millions of years of evolution will be gone. I mean, I feel like a personal loss every time I hear something is going extinct. Yes?
The indigenous tribes that you visited, I'm assuming there's no electricity, no internet, no anything. So how do you feel about those changes that will be coming with that hydroelectric dam? Because just as soon as that gets in, they will have electricity. Once you have electricity, on and on and on. So how do you feel about that?
Actually, some of these villages do have electricity and they get radio. And I watched the World Cup, the last World Cup, in the middle of nowhere. They had a satellite and they had a generator. And they would sit there, underneath of one of those blue tarps and watch the games. And I would say, do you know where Switzerland is? They only cared about Brazil. But, but it's coming. And in many of these villages, you already hear people watching soap operas at night. And the first thing that comes is religion, Christianity. I mean, that's the first thing that arrives.
So have you seen an impact upon villages that from the first time you visited them to now?
Yes, and we have to be very careful not to romanticize and confuse culture with costume. A lot of these places, they've lost their costume and they no longer paint themselves or use the feathers, and that's lost very quickly. But that doesn't mean that the culture is not there. So for me, I've always made a very special effort to photograph them as they are, not as I wish them to be, because they're changing very quickly. But it takes a lot to destroy culture. And even if a small glimmer of it exists, good leadership can usually preserve it. And what I've seen in these villages in the Amazon is when you have strong chiefs, like the ones that I show you in the picture, people follow. Is where you have lost the leadership that things start crumbling down very, very quickly. The next thing you lose is language. And when we were born, 40, 50, 60 years ago, there were about 6,000 languages spoken on this planet. Today, fewer than 3,000 are still whispered into the ears of children. So we've lost already half of the linguistic diversity of our planet. And to me, that's painful too. Because language is like a window into the past. It's like a glimpse into who we were. Anyway, let me continue on. I'm going to tell you about this rave just because it's still going on and because it's such a mighty fight that I think we're going to lose, but it's still worth fighting. The Great Bear Rainforest is in British Columbia. It's on the coast. And the government of Canada is trying to build a huge pipeline to ship their Alberta tar sands crude. Not just through the Keystone down to the Gulf of Mexico, but also to the British Columbia coast. And they're putting this pipeline through some of the most pristine rainforests on the planet. And the pipeline only goes to the beginning of the fjords, and then they're going to bring mega tankers to ship it out. And these tankers are 10 times larger than the Exxon Valdez. And of course the companies are saying that they're totally safe, we don't have to worry about it, it's going to be fine. But we all know that it's not if, but when a spill occurs, a lot of people are going to pay a very high price. The most interesting thing about this is we didn't offer to go there. We were asked to come by the First Nations, all the indigenous people that live along the coast. They were told that if they opposed the pipeline, it was not going to be built. But guess what? money talks. And of course, the pipeline is going through and these people are being ignored. So they asked us to come in to lend a voice. And this is what we did. So we sent, I think it was 13 photographers, and one of them was Paul Nicklin, my boyfriend, Paul, my partner. And he's a wildlife photographer, and he chose the spirit bear to become the flagship of this campaign. This is a black bear that has a genetic mutation. So maybe 1 in every 10 bears will be a white bear. They're pure white. They're not albino. They're like Oreo cookies. You'll see a black mom with 2 white cubs, or a white mom with 2 black cubs. They're phenomenal, and they're incredibly difficult to find. So we started looking for them in this kind of landscape. I mean, the fjords are everywhere, and the terrain is just incredibly difficult to travel. There's no roads. It's just impossible. And the First Nations there, they depend on the waterways, on the coastal resources to survive, especially on salmon. Salmon is this incredible resource. It's protein that comes back year after year. And it's delicious, and it's free, and it's healthy. And the government of Canada is replacing wild salmon with farm salmon. That's what we eat here. And it just baffles me. It takes one person to run an entire salmon farm. I mean, all you have to do is throw a few pellets of food. And it takes 4 pounds of wild fish to raise 1 pound of farm salmon. So if you want to do something for the environment, always order the wild salmon. No more farm salmon for you. Anyway, they really, really, truly depend on the ocean. And every year they set out a camp, and probably 90% of the villages go out to these fishing camps. And you know, they have their sacred trees that they go and visit, and they fish for halibut and salmon, and they just have these beautiful communities. I spent 3 weeks living with them, and I didn't want to leave. It was just unbelievable how bountiful the ocean is, and how well they know how to exploit it and how to preserve the food. And whatever they catch, you know, preserves throughout the winter and is food for everybody. It's really a special place. So you spend 6 weeks waiting for the bear in the rain and thinking about your next career, because you just blown all this money and there's no bear. And then, you know, all you need is one afternoon of good photography, and it made the cover of National Geographic. Paul got, I think it was 18 pages with his spirit bear, and then Chris Jones, the editor of National Geographic magazine, canceled. There was a whole feature on Canadian national parks, and he canceled that and gave us the space to talk about the rave and the pictures that we had made with the other 10 photographers. Then we turned all those images. We had 10 conservation partners in place, 10. And we gave them the images. Some of them created exhibits that are still traveling around. We did a book that just came out, Bear Spirit of the Wild, and it's Paul's pictures, and I wrote the text, and we invited great conservationists. We invited some of the First Nations to write about it. And the film, Spoil, we brought in a camera crew, a film crew, and they created a movie called Spoil, and that's winning all sorts of awards and going around. So with very little money, we found a huge way to put this issue forth. And what's been happening in British Columbia is all of a sudden people knew about it, and the people of British Columbia started questioning if this was really in their best interest. Alberta stands to make a lot of money from shipping their oil out. British Columbia only gets all the risk. And so the Premier of British Columbia for now has stopped the project and said no more, but it's still in the courts, you know, so you can't take your finger off the line. So 10 tips for doing the kind of work that I do, because you lose more battles than you win, is you really have to be passionate about what you do. You really have to believe in it. For me, it's been amazing to learn how to write. English, as you can tell, is a second language for me. So I really put a lot of effort in learning how to write correctly and passionately and with emotion. Research the people that fund the kinds of things that you're interested in. The United States is the most philanthropic country in the world. $270 billion are raised every year in this country for charity. 70% of that goes to church, you know, so we better all start praying for all the other issues. Only 4% goes to what is called animals, and that includes dogs, cats, and horses, but also wildlife. And there's a lot of money out there, and more than anything, there's a lot of very passionate people with means or with a little extra money that they want to get rid of. And if you can find those people to support your work, it's like magic. Becoming a good public speaker, a good advocate is very important. I think the best way to sell the message is like this. in person. And if you do it 40 people at a time, that's better than nothing, right? Learn multimedia. This is what we were just talking about, video, audio. I just learned how to do professional audio. I'll show you in a minute. It's really fun. Networking, and then playing nice, not being one of those jerk photographers, being fun to be with, especially if you're going to go with a team of scientists or conservationists, don't be a prima donna, be fun, be nice. Understand traditional media. Power of television, continues to stand as the best way to communicate. Social media, I hope we're all going to be Facebook friends after this, or at least tweet each other. And then be grateful to your donors, the people that support your work. They need to know that you appreciate, that they believe in you. This is something that was born out of that Spirit Bear shoot, because it was during that project that I realized that in Canada you can buy a hunting license for about $10, and then you can go and kill a grizzly bear or a black bear just for fun. It's amazing because it's an animal that is not even good to eat, and yet you have a lot of Europeans and a lot of Americans going to Canada just to shoot themselves a grizzly. So we went to the northern Yukon. This is a beautiful place called the Fishing Branch River. And the bears in this area is the only place in Canada where they've never been hunted. They're protected by the First Nations. And so somebody was saying to me, hunting and photography are very similar. And I disagree. As a hunter, you see a bear and you see it 300 feet away, and that's when you shoot it. As a photographer, you have to wait for the bear to choose in its own terms to come near you. And the bear decides, they know you're there. They're incredibly smart, very communicative. A bear is always telling you how it feels. I mean, a lot of the stories you hear is a bear that's been startled and attacks. But if the bear knows you're there, it usually doesn't want any trouble. The bears in this particular river, they were there for the salmon, and so they were not interested in us. They knew we were there, and they started coming closer and closer, and it was beautiful. I mean, you have the aurora borealis at night, and I think I have a tiny little clip that we put together. The bears, of course, are amazing, and if we can raise our voice and do something for the government of British Columbia to stop trophy hunting in Canada.
Could you say the name of the river again?
The Fishing Branch River. And it's an amazing cabin. It only holds 4 people at a time. They bring you out there by helicopter, and then you stay there for about 2 weeks. And so if you want to get away from it all, this is this is the place to go. And the guy that runs this whole operation, he's partnered with the First Nations that own the land. And he was a hunter before he was a guide. And he talks to you with such emotion about the many bears that he killed and how embarrassed and ashamed he is of what he did. And so he's dedicating the rest of his life to educating people about the fact that grizzly bears are not mindless predators. They're beautiful animals. Especially when you see them in a snowstorm like this, they're just magnificent. But of course, bears are not the only scary things I photograph. Very dangerous wildlife. This is actually a very endangered Madagascar land crab. But I'm very proud of this picture. It hangs at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. I don't know what comes next, so let me click. Aha. So now that I didn't want to run the ILCP anymore, what do? I go and create another organization. So this one is the same idea, to use the power of imagery and the power of our voices and our passion, but this time very specifically to promote the idea of more marine protected areas. If you think about national parks or protected areas on land, we have about 13% of the planet protected under some kind of park. In the ocean, we have less than 1%. And this is our biggest life support system. We need to protect more of the ocean. So the scientific community has challenged itself to protect 10% of the ocean by 2020. So it's a big job, and we feel that photography can really promote the idea, especially if you do beautiful pictures that you can take to governments and to heads of state. People ask me all the time, oh, we need to do projects with the kids, teach the children in the schools. And I'm thinking, by the time they grow up, it's going to be too late. I need to focus on the people that are in positions of power making the decisions today. So that's our audience for Sea Legacy. So if you're going to do a project like this is what I recommend. A lot of photographers have these crazy ideas. They're going to go on, photograph bacteria. You have to do something that's actually visually possible, that you can actually achieve with a camera. And sometimes it's challenging. The more you know about the technical aspects of photography, the better. Think about diversity of pictures. I think the mistake a lot of amateur photographers is they go and they make 12, 20 images of the same, or a lot of point pictures, or a lot of mediocre pictures. You have to think about, if your dream was to be published in National Geographic and you only have 12 images to tell a story, every image needs to stand alone as a double truck. It needs to be that beautiful. Otherwise, it's not even worth showing it around. Access is everything, and gaining access to a community, to an issue, sometimes takes time. If you're going to be in the business of doing nature or environmental or social photography, patience is the first thing you learn. Rejection is the second. but you have to put in the time to get people to accept you. You have to use words to amplify the content. You need to become a good writer, especially your captions that are so short. They need to be so important, so full of information and well written. Pay attention to detail and structure, and never, never, never underestimate the power of a good editor. Show your work around. If you have a good editor, they'll tell you which images need to go, and they usually go for the better. So those are my tips for doing a self-assigned project. It's very easy to get sucked into the images you love because they took such hard work to achieve, or they were so expensive, or whatever. If they're not good, they need to go. It's painful. This is a story I did with another conservation group called the Center for Marine Conservation in Honduras. And they asked me to come and document issues surrounding endangered fisheries down there. One of them is conch fishing, and the other one is a lobster fishery. And the interesting thing about this is the people, these are Mosquito Indians. They're very undereducated. They're very poor communities. And they were being hired by a middleman, owner of a boat, to go out and scuba dive for lobsters. So these people, without any scuba training, without any understanding of human physiology and gas physiology, were diving 10 tanks a day. And so what you get is a lot of people that have suffered from the bends. There, of course, is no medical help, no insurance. A lot of people died. I think in the last year, this was the year before last, 16 people had died and 40 had been paralyzed by the bends. I mean, it was really atrocious, all for our love of lobsters. So we went and did the stories. We talked to the fishermen, and we partnered with a local conservation group that had a great scientist, and he had a great idea. He proposed, instead of using scuba divers, to use what the Cubans are already using. It's called a Cuban casita. It's just a tin plank. You put it on the shallow water. The lobsters come and they hide underneath looking for shade. And then all you have to do is go lift it up and pick the lobsters of the right size, so nobody has to die or be paralyzed. And so doing that kind of story, when it has such a good outcome, it really makes you feel good. I mean, and of course I was not paid to go there. They paid for my airplane ticket, but I loved it. And finally, I'm not sure what comes next. I think it's audio. Let me see. So you guys have to guess what this is. These are killer whales. And they're talking to each other. This is a wonderful thing we did in just a couple of weeks ago, coming back from the northern fjords of Norway. And the story was, we're going to go and photograph the behavior of these killer whales as they round up the herring, the bait balls, to eat. Recently, humpbacks had started coming into the fjords, and nobody knew where they came from, these humpbacks. About 6 to 10 years ago, people started seeing these other whales coming in, and they thought that the humpbacks were helping the orcas round up the fish, the bubble netting behavior. And the scientist that we were working with, she's never been underwater with the orcas before. All her studies have been from a boat. So for her, it was the first time that she was getting a glimpse of this. And it was just magical. We were there the last days of the heaviest winter, so complete pitch black. And then the sun started coming out a little more every day, 18 minutes a day, until you finally start getting some light. But at the maximum, we were getting 4 hours of daylight. This is shot with my my A7R. Did I say that right? Yeah. And it's just beautiful. I mean, it's this permanent state of sunrise, sunset. The skies are always amazing. And there's orcas everywhere. We were spending days with 400 orcas and 20 humpbacks. And the place is just magical. So this was being presented at National Geographic today. Paul was in Washington presenting this. And it was funny because what we realized is once you put your head underwater, first of all, that the herring are incredibly abundant. This is a very well-managed fishery. And so there's schools of herring that are the size of a football field. I mean, you cannot see the end of the fish. And the orcas are, they're massaging the bowl and they're hurting the fish and they're keeping it in a tight bowl. And then one of the orcas will come and they'll snap the fish with their tail and then they'll grab one fish at a time and eat them with surgical precision. So we were showing this to the scientist and she was like, oh my God, I've never seen this before. That's amazing. But then the other thing we discovered is when you're in the water with these orcas, of course they're not paying any attention to people, they're busy with the fish. You feel the humpbacks before you see them. The water that they displace, you feel them coming. And if you're sitting on top of the bait bowl about 6 feet below you, all of a sudden you'll see the pectoral fins of the humpbacks coming from underneath. And they don't have echolocation, so they don't know that you're there. So if you see the white fins coming, get out of the way, because they're coming to eat whatever they can. So we discovered that the humpbacks were not really helping the orcas. They're stealing their food. And this was a new behavior, something that had never been observed or reported before. And it felt really good to be part of scientific discovery. So this is a little video I put together of 30 seconds. What we were doing just a couple of weeks ago, and that was really fun. So we have a few more minutes if you want to talk about specific things, about how do you write a proposal to get to a place like northern Norway. And there's many resources online, but a big idea. So how do you write the proposal? If you look online, you're going to find a lot of resources, but the most important one is short is better. Do not ramble. I mean, it's a big idea, but it's succinct and it's very clear to understand. If you have to explain it to a stranger in an elevator ride that takes 5 floors, that's how specific it needs to be. This is what I'm going to go and do. And add details. People want to know what is it that you see in your head. And then if you go and find something else, don't be disappointed. It's a journey and it's discovery. And a lot of the times we find that the humpbacks were not really helping. They're out there for their own gain. It's pretty interesting. So there, pitch for a lofty goal, make a big wish, and your images can change the world, and we need all of you to be storytellers. So thank you so much.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.